This event tonight is brought to you by the Church in the 21st Century Center here at Boston College. The C21 Center is a catalyst and resource for the renewal of the Catholic Church in the United States. I'm Patrick Gonsalves, Assistant Director here at C21, and I'm honored to be moderating tonight's event, which is the first part of our three-part webinar C21 Easter series, Revitalizing Our Church During COVID. Tonight's event, titled Leading in COVID, Lessons Learned and the Path Ahead, will feature panelists who are leaders in the Catholic Church. Our invited guests will offer their specific insights to best practices and recommendations during this health crisis, and which challenges have been most formidable. We'll cover perspectives that are representative of St. Clement's Eucharistic Shrine, a well-known parish in Boston. We'll touch upon the landscape of Catholic schools, as well as the Archdiocese of Baltimore. Ultimately, our goal for tonight's webinar is to provide important, useful information and hope for parishes and parishioners during this challenging time. To all our attendees of tonight's webinar, if the Spirit calls you to put any of these insights into practice at your parish, school, etc., then I greatly encourage you to do so. Our discussion will go on for approximately 45 minutes, and then we'll leave 15 minutes for question and answer. Without further ado, let's introduce our panelists. Dr. Jimena Dubrowick joins us from the Archdiocese of Baltimore, where she currently serves as the Director of Catechetical and Pastoral Formation. Father Peter Grover is a religious priest with the Oblates of the Virgin Mary. Presently, he is the Director of St. Clement's Eucharistic Shrine in Boston. And last but not least, Sister Elaine Poitras joins us tonight. Sister Elaine is a Sister of Holy Cross and the Executive Director at the Innovative Catholic School Network. For more detailed information on our panelists, please visit the link in the chat that Elizabeth will share with everyone. Okay, let's begin tonight's conversation. So the first question I'll direct to Father Peter Grover. Father Grover, thank you so much for taking the time to join us tonight to be a panelist.
Thank you.
St. Clement's Eucharistic Shrine in Boston has taken bold measures during this pandemic. Your youthful parish has gone above and beyond in providing full and safe access to most, if not all, the sacraments. Can you offer some insight as to how and why your parish seems to be slightly ahead of the curve with regards to accessibility?
Well, the first thing we did was, obviously, we took the directives of the Archdiocese, which was a great form of information. That's what we needed at first, was information and how to keep everybody safe. That was the primary, and they did a lot of the work for us, so we just had to follow a lot of the instructions. At first, it took a little while to get everything in place, especially after every Mass and every time there's a group of people in there, you have to wash everything down. And so we found the solution. We bought a lot of 5-gallon drums of this solution, and everything was spraying all the time. And we have a good rotation of seminarians. So we have a seminary here as well, and so we have a pretty good in-house staff that try to help. But we also have an inside community too, so we have to, with elderly priests, we have to take care of and protect them if anything comes in the house. So that was the big thing, was to try to get it. Once we had Masses and the liturgies opened up, the next thing we wanted to do was make sure that confession was available. We're getting a lot of calls for, are you guys available for confession? The problem is, if you go in a confessional booth, it's really isolated in there, and you can get really, so what we did is, my brother, who's a carpenter, built this booth, and it has three compartments. The first compartment, the person goes in. The second compartment between the priest and the penitent is blank. It's just a 6-foot space, which makes it safe. Then the third compartment, the priest goes in. So it's in a big open area. It's in our little chapel, but it has a 36-foot ceiling, and so people feel safe. So the only one person at a time comes into this really big room, and they go to this. So we're able to hear confessions, and that was a big That was a big help. We had a line outside where they could line up and come in. And we offer it before every Mass, daily, weekend, every Mass. We're in there about a half hour, 45 minutes. And weekends, we're there an hour before. And it's been very busy with that. That was so we've added that to our to the early stages. So just a longer answer than you probably wanted.
That was perfect. Thank you, Father. Thank you for offering that insight. And I can also attest to that you guys have really done other things like the overflow room. And I know various parishes are implementing different things, but I think you guys stood apart in terms of not shying anyone away and creating enough space so everyone can attend Mass. And I, for one, as your parishioner, I greatly appreciate that. Let's shift from the Archdiocese of Boston to the Archdiocese of Baltimore. So this question directed to Dr. Jimena de Broek. There's over 500,000 Catholics from all different backgrounds, and Jimena, you are the Director of Catechetical and Pastoral Formation. How have the challenges of COVID changed the way you minister? What are some of the graces you uncovered throughout this experience and others that others can learn from?
Sure. Thank you, Patrick, and thank you to the great efforts that BC is doing. Thank you for this invitation and holding this webinar. So to answer your question, how has this crisis changed the way I have led and I continue to learn how to change and adapt? I think it is fair to say that change did not occur immediately. I think that the first 8 weeks or so, since the third Sunday of Lent of last year, those first 8 weeks were pretty much a quick crisis response that was not sustainable. But during that time, it just really changed the way I led to help me be more intentional in a couple of areas. I think that listening has really been a hallmark of, and continues to be a hallmark of my leadership. But I think what I wasn't doing really well is triaging the problems and prioritizing. And it would be good to know for those who join us today that for 13 years before changing my career path to service of the church, I was a critical care nurse. And skills that I learned back then to triage what is an urgent and an important problem in the life of a patient, those skills really serve me well now in leadership, because very quickly I learned that the pace at which we were reacting, not really responding, but reacting, was not sustainable. And so my leadership became very more focused on, first of all, longer prayer periods, just spending a good chunk of the early morning hours in prayer, and then listening very carefully to those parish catechetical leaders in the field. And from listening to their stories of anxiety, losing jobs, not knowing what to do, I just really formulated this way to prioritize and triage. So some things needed immediate attention, and some things could be something that could be delayed for the end of the week or even the next week. I also, in this period, I learned to be even more of an agile leader than I had been before. It really challenged me to pivot quickly in what I thought I could do and what I realized that needed to be done. I think it taught me a lot about some things that I thought were essential, but really they weren't. Some things that we might have been doing as an archdiocese, that, holding big events for folks, and which were not excellently attended, but, somewhat well attended. But was that really the best way to minister to the leaders in the field? So it just really invited me to consider new possibilities and be more flexible in what I was doing. Probably the chunk of the next 3 months were spent in listening to the field. I held meetings with the 2 women who work for me, the 2 coordinators. We held meetings with parish leaders of the different regions. We have about 135 parishes. And so that could give an idea how many parish catechetical leaders. So we didn't have them all in one session. We had them in smaller groups. And that is something also new that we began doing. The regions would meet on their own, but very seldom would I interact with them as much as I did in the recent months. So that possibility of leadership with more listening and more being attentive to their needs as opposed to giving them what I thought they needed was really, really important. I think first and foremost to build a relationship of trust with the field, but second of all, to help me just really understand better the needs of so many of the parishes that it's really hard to get around to 130 parishes, 130 plus parishes. So that was something that I learned during this time. Another lesson was how to minister best to the Hispanic community. We have 21 parishes with Hispanic communities, with bilingual communities. And about a quarter of our Catholic population is from the various Hispanic communities, primarily Central and South America, but we do have folks from other regions. And it just really became increasingly clear how underserved they are and how underserved the inner city parishes are. Not that this was a great revelation, but it just became even more apparent how much more we needed to do for these communities. Because of so many reasons, poverty, lack of documentation in some of the population, both the Black Catholics and the Hispanic communities are already in danger of not receiving adequate care in many ways. And definitely this was an area that was highlighted. So if many of these folks were not able to stay home because their job just did not allow that. So we saw, as probably many cities across the nation, so we saw higher incidence of the virus in these populations and more sickness, more death. And at the same time that they're dealing with these struggles, some of the issues that would be kind of a concern otherwise, for instance, faith formation, really had to just be considered from a different light. And so that just really helped us, together with a new bishop, with an auxiliary bishop that we have, who's the vicar for the Hispanic community, just help us realize what were some areas of immediate need, immediate attention for them. This really opened up possibilities of not only of new leadership, but possibilities of doing things different in spite of the challenges and the fact that we really did not open up probably until very late May, early June, and not the entire diocese, which comprises 9 counties plus the city, was not able to open all at once. We opened different counties at a time. The city of Baltimore has been hit pretty hard, so where some other counties that were more on the periphery opened earlier, the city of Baltimore would open and go back, open and go back. But at any rate, during this time of absence of in-presence worship, I think it gave the opportunity for many folks, many of the parishes, there was a few that didn't go online right away, but nevertheless, it gave a new possibility that although we all understand it's not ideal, it did give, I think, those of us who had not experienced this, a possibility to consider the isolation of those who are homebound, the sick and the homebound, that, there's folks who minister to them routinely, but I think the population at large, we were not just as aware of the pain and the isolation experienced by this members of our mystical body. So the possibility of now all of us being in solidarity with those that are in isolation was definitely a unique moment of growth for all of us. Along the same lines, however, not being able to experience the gatherings in person also gave us a unique possibility of imagining us as a Eucharistic people when we couldn't gather in person. So it was, I think, for me personally, it was a reflection of what the community of the exile in the history of Israel must have felt living in Babylon. So they were still God's people. They didn't have the temple, but they were still God's people, and God guided them through that period of not having the temple. And I think it was just a realization of how God is present in our lives in so many ways and working in our lives in so many ways, in spite of the enormous challenge of not being able to worship in person. This also opened up avenues for us to look at faith formation and sacramental formation in a whole new light, something which the Archdiocese had already been considering for the past year or so. How could we have models of faith formation and sacramental formation that really spoke to the lived reality of today? And even though the models we have used for the past century or so might have worked well for a time, they really are not working well now. We continue to have folks that are Catholic in name only, and by that I mean what all of us understand, probably people who might be registered in a parish, but who are really not only not participating in Mass, but even those who might go to Mass as a check the box, but not engaging in their faith in any other way. So this was challenges that had already been coming up in our planning. And one of the things that we wanted to begin doing, and when we were able to begin implementing some of this during this time, is to shift away from a simple classroom model where we traditionally sit the children down with textbooks and they learn the faith like that, to trying to just really go to a family model. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we don't use books. The issue is not whether to use books or not, but how we're using those books. So although most people were ready to transfer right away from going in an in-person model to sending a bag of books home with the kids, well, that is not really changing the model. So we've just really tried to encourage parish catechetical leaders to consider other ways to begin inviting families to really come to faith, and not simply understand faith formation as something that the parish does, the priest does, the catechist does, but I, as a parent, just give the children away for 24 hours during the year. And I'm saying 24 hours because normally we meet for, 24 sessions during the year, give or take. So this invites the possibility of actually teaching the families how to pray together. We have excelled, I think, traditionally in our history, in emphasizing the intellectual part of faith formation, but I think that there's a gap between that intellectualization of the faith and the lived faith. And so this gave us a possibility to invite families to just pray together, very much along the lines of what you're doing with Breakfast with God, just inviting families to be a family grounded in the faith together, so that our faith no longer is lived, or hopefully our faith is not simply lived as a 1 hour a week, but as a 24/7 commitment. And so that gave us a great possibility there. Equally with sacramental formation, some of the changes that we had been talking about, they're not fully implemented now. They're far from being fully implemented, but conversations have started surrounding what exactly are we doing with sacramental formation. Are we helping children and adults get to the day when they celebrate the sacrament, or are we forming them to live sacramental life? And those are two different methodologies, two different goals, two different paths. And so hopefully our desire is truly to engage folks to live a sacramental life, not simply to celebrate the sacrament on a given day. So conversations have started surrounding that. We have a very energetic professional association of catechetical leaders in the Archdiocese. And even as we speak, they're gathering together in work groups and trying to find ways that they could continue the conversation even after we come back to a full in-presence worship and full in presence faith formation. We don't want to go back to February 2020, although it is comfortable in some ways. Really, it wasn't an ideal situation. So this has invited us, challenged us, forced us, brought us kicking and screaming to just look at different ways to imagine being faithful disciples and forming others to be faithful disciples.
Thank you so much, Jimena, for that insightful response. So important, so formative for families to pray together. And you mentioned breakfast with God, and that's a great example of that. You also mentioned underserved communities, which I hope we can hone in later on in the discussion. Now let's shift to talk about Catholic schools, and let's get a leader Catholic school perspective. Too few schools are growing. Some are holding their own, and some are barely hanging on. Too many are closing, as far as I'm concerned, and too many have already closed. The positive outcomes of a Catholic education are too strong to ignore, and yet Catholic schools across the country still face declining enrollment. And why that is. A recent article by American Magazine highlighted some interesting figures pertaining to the current landscape of Catholic school enrollment. Elizabeth will share the link in the chat for anyone who wants to dive deeper in that article, but I'll just give some data points. Pre-kindergarten enrollment at Catholic schools was down 26.6% this year from last year. Only 10 of the 174 dioceses with Catholic schools had an increase of 1% or more in student enrollment. Nationally, Catholic preschool enrollment dropped by around 45,000, making up about 40% of the overall decrease. Among the few schools that are growing are St. Joseph, a small Catholic school in Anderson, South Carolina, where the limiting factors of the pandemic allowed for an opportunity for the school to reintroduce itself to the community. So this question is for Sister Elaine. Most of your vocation has been spent serving the Catholic schools and with the hopes and dreams of opening a new Catholic school. Can the pandemic offer some Catholic schools new hope like it did with St. Joseph's in South Carolina? What do you think we need to do in the future?
So thank you, Patrick. And hi to everybody. I'm so happy to see people I know, sisters and Faith Feed friends and committee members. It's really nice to see you all. Thank you so much for being here. Oh, first of all, Patrick, I really took time to look at the statistics that you mentioned. And so these are the statistics from NCEA, actually. Sister Dale McDonald, another BC grad, is the Director of Public Policy and Research at NCEA. And she would be the first to say that data of any kind is only data of any kind. It doesn't necessarily tell the whole story. And one of the questions that I was looking at was, well, is the pandemic responsible for the decrease, especially at that preschool age? And really, we don't know. And the reason we don't know is because these statistics are gathered from the schools. They're self-reported data. We don't know what context they're answering in. So yes, they could have, some of that could be the effects of the pandemic, particularly in terms of job loss or an unwillingness to put the children at risk. But it could be anything else. It could be a dissatisfaction with personnel or environment. It could be issues related to the practice of one's faith. I've seen this even in teaching parish religious ed, where the parents are embarrassed and don't want their children to participate, especially at the times when you have to talk about the obligations of Catholic life, sin. And those are all tricky topics to get around, especially in today's day. I can remember being at a meeting, and I was a guest and we're talking to the second grade about the sacrament of Holy Eucharist. Started out with talking about baptism and how we are children of God. our baptism invites us into being children of God. And this little girl just got so panicky. She began to fill up, and she said, "Does that mean my daddy can't go to heaven and he's not a child of God because he's not baptized?" Well, you know, you got to think on your feet for those things, but those are the challenges that come with teaching religion. I think whether we're in the Catholic school or in faith formation, families are not what they were when I was a kid. I know, a long time ago now. So it could be a lot of that. It can be issues related to faith, issues related to the church itself, people leaving because of the crises that they've observed and maybe experienced, inaccurate information about schools, kinds of stereotypes that have been put on Catholic schools. And I've added to this the effect of social media as well. So because parents use social media to either be happy about their schools on Facebook, or if they've got somebody to complain about, they can spread a lot of difficulty through Facebook as well. So looking at the statistics alone don't necessarily tell us the story about why people are leaving the school, because that information isn't collected. The increase is an interesting piece, and you mentioned it. I looked up St. Joseph's School in Anderson, South Carolina, to see what it was that might attract people to come to the school. Maybe it's a small town, so maybe it's the only alternative to the public school, and it was staying open. I don't know if that's true or not. But I read a little piece of their history, and I kind of liked it, and I thought it was a really nice attraction to coming into a school. They said the students are taught love and respect for self and others, compassion, responsibility, dignity, and integrity, peace, and justice. The integration of values and academics enables each student to grow as a whole person. Now, given the history that we've been living between the pandemic and the crises in society and in government, parents might be attracted to a place like that where it feels at peace and safe, a place where children will learn something better. And as you said, you talked about also the 10 dioceses that have experienced a little bit of growth. That is because of the pandemic. That is clearly parents coming into the Catholic schools, many of which opened up in September. They didn't stay open at the time of crisis in last winter really. But they did open up in September. And for instance, a diocese that I'm living in now, Diocese of Manchester, the bishop offered to $1,000 discount in tuition for anybody who would come into the Catholic schools. That was a nice invitation. And also did that for the people who are already in the Catholic schools. And then said that he would pay a second year. So those $1,000 a year invitations certainly brought the people in, and hopefully will keep them in. That is going to be the biggest challenge. How to sustain that enrollment once everybody can go back to regular school, and whether people will be willing to continue to pay. That requires of the leadership of our schools. You asked me about the challenge and hope. I'm getting ahead of myself, I'm sorry. That's going to require of the schools, of the leadership in the schools, a ministry of presence and servant leadership. Actually being able to move out of the old paradigms into the new paradigms, into a new paradigm. Administering the school from home is quite a challenge. I've had the privilege of working with new principal groups from the Archdiocese of Chicago, where I've given retreats, because they've got a great woman who is director of leadership formation, and with whom I've worked to provide retreats for the new principals. However, they got cut off with the pandemic. So we still met together online. That was our first experience of Zoom in a major kind of way. What I want to point out to you is how challenging that was for the principals, for the teachers as well. But the principals themselves felt responsible for both the kids, both the students, and for those teachers. And they were home with their own families who also had needs and demands because they had kids who now had to do their schoolwork. And I'm going to give you one example of how important it is to pay attention to the leaders at this point. One of those women identified herself as a new single parent. Her husband had left. She had two children. One is autistic, the older of the two. I think he's 7th or 8th grade. And the younger one also had some difficulties. Special needs, both of them. So while trying to administer her school, she also had to try to help these students of her own because for the autistic child, she had not even received any direction from the special school that he was in. She was crying by the time we got through this conversation, and as if just to give credence to what she was saying, she was suddenly shot with a Nerf ball from her youngest child. And she felt like, see, this is what it's like all day. Secondly, she and the other principals were having a hard time putting limits on their workday. They suddenly had no office hours. Everybody would just call them anytime, in the evening, at night. Parents were unsure and insecure, and the leaders didn't want to be ignoring that. They wanted to pay attention to that. So they were getting little rest and a lot of work. They were also working hard to, and this is part of this whole piece. They were working hard to create or to sustain at least the faith community on which Catholic schools are built from a distance, with everybody separated from one another. Many of them did a wonderful job, and I've heard this from a lot of places about teachers going from house to house and leaving gifts for the kids. But the principals also going from house to house and leaving gifts for the teachers, meeting them like 6 feet apart in masks and just putting the thing in the middle of the sidewalk. Those were beautiful things, beautiful efforts at being present, at being servants. And as time has gone on, they were closed at the beginning, so they were doing all remote, but after a while now, they would become hybrid. By this time, the parents who had come from the public schools were happy. Besides, Chicago public schools were not open for a very long time. So the families are getting settled now. They had to reach out in a special way to these people, how to make children comfortable in a Catholic school that they had never been in. So that whole sense of ministry of presence and servant leadership is important at every level of leadership. And I think that will continue to be. I think that's what gives, it's a challenge, but I also think that's what gives hope to the Catholic schools. I think also they were very conscious of giving a premier academic program in the best way they could. They had physical education. I can just imagine what that was like in their homes. And science experiments and music. There's one principal who she always started school with a song, so she got on every morning and started school with a song on Zoom. So they were very attentive to that and trying to keep the community of faith going. and pay attention to all of the pieces of the faith community, including faith and moral development. And that is our hope. So when you talk about all the schools closing, I have not all, but so many schools closing, I have a lot of ideas about that. Here's why some of this is true. It's fairly evident if you look at the bench of leadership of Catholic school leadership and Catholic school teachers, that the bench is not very deep. That in fact, so many of the people coming in to administer our schools and to teach in our schools now, they themselves may not have had a Catholic school education, first of all. They went to university, even a Catholic university, chances are that they were not instructed in what it meant to be a Catholic school teacher or a Catholic school principal. They come with very, very little experience. I interviewed a guy once. He was retiring from the public school, so wanted an easy job. So he thought he'd become a Catholic school principal. Little did he know. So he was a finalist for this position, and we began to talk to him about taking care of the budget, taking care of faith formation, and we went through all of these lists, and he was getting more and more pale as it went on. He was not happy now to be a finalist, and he withdrew before he fainted because he had no idea how much work these people have to do. But the hardest one of all is the faith leadership. Faith formation, not only for the children, that's the easy part, because the children are in development anyway. But then we get a group of Catholic school teachers now who may not have even gone beyond 6th grade, depending on the faith formation program they were in their parishes. So they are at all different levels of faith formation too. So the very foundation upon which Catholic schools are built, in some places at some times has weakened because of that, because they don't understand the faith community. They don't understand why, even about prayer, sometimes starting a day with prayer. So that is a huge challenge. I would love to encourage principals and teachers to do this. Actually, I am going to do this in a couple of weeks. I have a conference, and the title of it is Legacy and Leadership. Besides doing the retreats like we've been doing with the Archdiocese of Chicago, which are on faith development, who I am as a person of faith and as a Catholic school educator, those retreats are valuable, and I think there are folks who have learned a lot and appreciate them very much. But also at our schools, our legacies are important. Who founded this school? Why did they found this school? What are the qualities that you saw in action? I've been really working on the legacy of our founder, for instance, and of the very first school that was founded in New England by our community. That was a school of risk. The pastor of that parish wanted a school in his parish, so he marched up to Canada, where our sisters were, and said he would like for them to send some teachers.
Sister, I apologize. I'm looking at the watch, and we're cramped for time. I want to get one more question in before we hit the Q&A. I apologize for that. We have about 5 minutes left, and I'm hoping to get an answer from each of the panelists. In 2 minutes or so, what are your hopes for a post-COVID world? Why don't we start with Father Grover? I think you're on mute, Father.
Yeah, I put myself on mute. I don't want to. So, well, my hope is that we see that Before we were having standing room only masses at Sunday, especially the Sunday night. It's very popular, and we're in a college area here in Boston, and so that was a good mass to have, and so I'm hoping to get the crowds that we had back again. The early signs look very positive. It just looks really really good. Ash Wednesday we couldn't turn anybody away, but we had everybody in nooks and crannies. It was and then last Sunday, so people are getting anxious to get back, and they want to get back. They want to get there. Also, we've been keeping up with a lot of good communication with a lot of the people. People have been very incredibly generous. When this first came out, I said, "Oh, this is not good. No collections. I mean, I'm looking at bankruptcy." But people have been really, really generous with us, and we have mostly students too. So we have a lot of students, and people have been really coming forward. So I've been keeping the communication really strong. Every donation I get, I thank them. So I'm talking to the people. A bulletin is online. We went paperless years ago, so we had that in place. So I always give an update every week in the bulletin. So we're able to communicate with the people. So we're still connected with them. So that's my hope, is that and I think a lot of people are looking forward to getting back together again. So that's my answer. Yeah.
Thank you, Father Grover. Dr. Jimena de Baroque, what are your hopes for a post-COVID world? Nope, I think you're on mute, Jimena.
There we go. I needed somebody to let me unmute. So my hopes for post-COVID world is that we would come back as a renewed people of God, aware that God is present with us in difficult times, and open to the possibilities of new ways of doing things in order to bear more fruit, which would mean a lot of courage, a lot of perseverance, and just to be creative in ways that we could not simply count our fruitfulness, although it is so important for folks to gather for Mass, for celebrations of rosaries and different in-presence activities that we do at church, but that we could just really be the people that live our faith 24/7, not simply the 1 hour a week.
Thank you, Jimena. That was terrific. Sister Elaine, what are your hopes for a post-COVID world?
My hope is that we can become more proactive than reactive. At this time, it's the right time to re-examine our paradigms and transform those paradigms to fit more appropriately into the 21st century and beyond. I think it's also a good time, it's pretty much the same here, updating our practice to create a Catholic environment that provides a genuine welcome, especially to those people who have not come to church now for a year, and to enliven our community of faith. And I'll stop with that.
Thank you, Sister.
Mm-hmm.
I would like to thank our three panelists today, Dr. Jimena de Baroque, Father Peter Grover, and Sister Elaine Portress, for graciously offering their time, energy, experience, input, and ideas. My hope is that we can continue to engage in community dialogue and cultivate and share ideas that will be oriented towards forming solutions that will embolden and revitalize our church, our faith, and our faith communities.